I served my country in Vietnam. Now I fight to survive cold nights on the street. My name is Frank. I'm 63, a veteran, and I sleep under a bridge with men half my age. 2 years ago, I had keys to my own front door and coffee with my wife every morning. People ask how a man who built houses for 30 years ends up with everything in a shopping cart. It didn't happen overnight. It started with my back giving out and bills that wouldn't stop coming. I told myself, just until the disability comes through. I believed it. One missed payment became two. Foreclosure papers felt like enemy fire I couldn't dodge. My wife stopped looking at me the same way. My daughter's calls got shorter. I kept saying, I'll figure it out. I didn't. Let me take you back to the day I handed over my house keys, and the moment I realized some battles you fight alone. When a man who served his country can't afford a roof, what does home even mean? The cardboard boxes sat half-packed on my kitchen table like some kind of cruel joke. I'd started filling them 3 times that morning, but my hands kept stopping. 30 years of living in this house, and I was supposed to fit it all into 12 boxes from U-Haul. The eviction notice lay under my coffee mug, the red letters bleeding through where I'd spilled my morning drink. Final notice, it said, like the first 5 hadn't been clear enough. January 15th, 2014. That was today. The sheriff would come at noon to make sure I was gone. I picked up the framed photo from the counter. Me and Marie at Jessica's high school graduation. All 3 of us grinning like we owned the world. Maybe we did, back then. Marie's hair was still brown in that picture, before the chemo took it. Before the medical bills started coming faster than I could pay them. The VA paperwork scattered across the table told the whole story. Disability application denied. Appeal pending. Social workers' notes about insufficient documentation of service-connected injury. I'd carried 50-pound bags of concrete for 30 years after Vietnam. But apparently that wasn't enough proof that my back was shot. My phone buzzed. A text from Jessica. Dad, please call me. We can figure this out. I'd stopped answering her calls last week. What was I supposed to say? That her old man, the guy who taught her to drive and walked her down the aisle, couldn't keep a roof over his own head? The bourbon bottle on the counter was down to its last 2 inches. I'd bought it yesterday with money that should have gone to groceries. But groceries seemed pointless when you didn't have a kitchen to cook in. I opened the cabinet under the sink and pulled out my toolbox. Hammer, level, measuring tape, tools that had fed my family for 3 decades. The hammer's handle was worn smooth from my grip. I'd built kitchen cabinets with these hands, framed houses, installed floors that would outlast me. The truck was parked in the driveway, already loaded with my clothes and Marie's medical records. I couldn't leave those behind. The insurance company might still need them, even though Marie wasn't coming back to argue with them anymore. I walked through the living room one last time. The carpet had a stain where Jessica spilled grape juice when she was 7. The wall still had pencil marks where we'd measured the kid's height every birthday. Tommy, my grandson, had added his mark last Christmas. Grandpa Frank, when I'm tall as you, can I use your big hammer? Kids think everything lasts forever. I locked the front door and set the keys on the kitchen counter like the notice said. The house would sit empty for months while the bank figured out what to do with it. But empty houses don't worry about staying warm. Empty houses don't wonder where their next meal is coming from. The truck started on the 2nd try. The gas gauge showed half a tank. I had $127 in my wallet and nowhere to go. I drove past the Home Depot, where I'd worked my last job before my back gave out. Past the diner where Marie and I used to eat breakfast on Sundays. Past Jessica's old elementary school. The parking lot behind Home Depot was quiet. A few cars scattered around, nobody paying attention to anything. I pulled into a spot near the back, away from the loading dock. The engine ticked as it cooled down. This was temporary, just until I figured out my next move. The disability appeal would come through soon. I'd find work somewhere, doing something that didn't require lifting. This was just a rough patch. I reached for the bourbon bottle and unscrewed the cap. The radio played an old Creedence song, something about a fortunate son. I turned it up and closed my eyes. Outside, the afternoon sun was already getting weak. February in Portland meant the cold was coming whether you were ready or not. The truck's gas tank showed half full, and I had $127 in my wallet. The engine ran all night, but I still woke up shivering. The heater worked fine, but cold has a way of finding you anyway. Especially when you're sleeping in a pickup truck at 3 in the morning, wondering how your life got this small. I dozed off and on, never really sleeping. Every time a car door slammed or someone walked by, I jerked awake thinking it was the police. But nobody bothered me. The Home Depot parking lot stayed quiet except for the delivery trucks that started showing up around 5. My neck felt like someone had twisted it with pliers. Sleeping sitting up in a truck seat wasn't something my 63-year-old body was built for. I rubbed the back of my neck and checked the gas gauge. Still showing a quarter tank, but the needle had dropped overnight. At 6, a security guard in a white Ford pickup drove through the lot. He slowed down when he passed my truck, but didn't stop. I pretended to be checking something in my glove compartment. Just a guy getting an early start on his errands. When he was gone, I started the engine and drove to McDonald's on Sandy Boulevard. The same McDonald's where Jessica had worked during high school, saving money for community college. She'd come home smelling like French fries and complaining about rude customers. Back then, I told her it was good experience, that any honest work was worth doing. I bought coffee with quarters from my truck's cup holder and used their bathroom to splash water on my face. The mirror showed 3 days of stubble and eyes that looked like I'd been drinking, which I had. The coffee was weak and too hot, but it was warm and cost less than $2. I sat in a corner booth and watched people come and go. Construction workers grabbing breakfast before job sites. Office workers checking their phones while they waited for coffee. Normal people with normal mornings and places to be. My phone buzzed. Dave Mitchell, my old foreman. Frank, got a small job if you're interested. Basement renovation on Hawthorne. 2 days work, maybe 3. Cash. I stared at the text for a long minute. Dave knew about my back problems. He'd been there when the workers' comp doctor said I couldn't do heavy lifting anymore. But maybe he had something light. Maybe he was throwing me a bone because we'd worked together for 15 years. I texted back. Yeah. What time? 8 o'clock. 1247 Hawthorne. Bring your tools. I finished my coffee and drove back to the truck. My toolbox was in the back, wrapped in a tarp to keep the rain off. I hadn't used these tools in 6 months, not since my last attempt at going back to work ended with me flat on my back in the emergency room. The job site was a narrow craftsman house with scaffolding on one side. Dave's van was already there, along with 2 other trucks I recognized. These guys had kept working while I'd been fighting with insurance companies and disability lawyers. Dave walked over when I parked. He looked older than I remembered, grayer around the temples. Or maybe I just hadn't noticed before. Frank. He didn't quite meet my eyes. Good to see you. Dave. We shook hands, but his grip felt careful, like he wasn't sure what he was dealing with. So what's the job? He walked me toward the house. Homeowner wants to finish his basement. Drywall, some electrical, basic stuff. Thought you could handle the detail work while we do the heavy lifting. I nodded. Detail work meant steady hands and attention to measurements. Things that didn't require a strong back. Things I could still do, assuming my hands weren't shaking. But when we got to the basement, I could see the problem. The drywall sheets were 12 feet long and heavy. The electrical boxes needed to be mounted 8 feet up. Even the light work would mean reaching and lifting and bending in ways my back couldn't handle. I picked up my level and tried to look useful. The other guys, Mike and Tony, both younger than my son would be if I'd had a son, were already measuring and marking cuts. They moved with the easy confidence of men whose bodies still did what they asked. 20 minutes into the job, I reached up to mark a stud location and felt something pop in my lower back. Not the sharp, shooting pain this time. Just a dull warning that said, stop now or pay later. I set down my pencil and walked outside. Dave followed me. You okay? I looked at my hands. They were shaking. Not from the cold this time. I don't think I can do this, Dave. He nodded like he'd been expecting it. It's okay, Frank. Take care of yourself first. I packed my tools back in their box and loaded them into the truck. Dave came over as I was closing the tailgate. Frank, if you need anything, I'm fine, I said, which was the biggest lie I'd told all morning. I drove away without looking back. The gas gauge now showed less than a quarter tank, and I'd spent $8 on coffee and a breakfast sandwich I couldn't finish. 3 weeks later, I couldn't afford to keep the engine running anymore. The truck had become my bedroom, my closet, and my office. I'd figured out which parking lots were safe, which gas stations let you use their bathrooms without buying anything, and how to make a cup of coffee last 3 hours at different restaurants. But gas was $4 a gallon, and my disability check was still under review, according to the VA office downtown. The $127 I'd started with was down to $23, even though I'd been eating as little as possible. February in Portland is cold enough to kill you if you're not careful. The weatherman on my truck radio talked about overnight lows in the 30s, wind chill in the 20s. Numbers that didn't mean much when you had a warm house to go home to. Numbers that meant everything when you didn't. I found out about the Union Gospel Mission from a guy panhandling outside the plaid pantry on Powell. He was maybe 40, wearing a Carhartt jacket that had seen better years. "You new to this?" he asked when he saw me counting change in my truck. "What?" "The streets. You got that look like you still think this is temporary." I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that I was different, that I had a plan and this was just a bad patch. Instead, I asked him about places to stay warm. "Mission's got emergency beds," he said, "but you better get in line by 2 o'clock. They fill up fast when it's cold." The Union Gospel Mission was downtown, in a brick building that looked like it had been there since the Depression. A line of men stretched around the block, most of them carrying backpacks or garbage bags full of belongings. I got in line behind a skinny guy about my age who was reading a paperback book. "First time?" he asked without looking up from his book. "Yeah, gets easier. And harder." He turned a page. "Name's Tommy. Frank." Tommy had been on the streets for 2 years, he told me. Lost his job at a print shop when his drinking got bad. Lost his apartment when the unemployment ran out. Lost his family when he chose the bottle over everything else. "You a vet?" he asked. "Vietnam. 2 tours." He nodded. "Gulf War myself. They got special programs for vets, but the waiting lists are long. Real long." The line moved slowly. Men ahead of us got turned away when the beds filled up. By 4 o'clock, I was close enough to see the front door, but a guy in a mission jacket came out and told everyone behind me to try again tomorrow. "Sorry, folks. We're full up." Tommy wasn't surprised. "Happens more nights than not. You got somewhere else to go?" I shook my head. "Come on. I'll show you the all-night laundromat." The laundromat on Division was bright and warm and open 24 hours. Tommy showed me how to feed quarters into the machines to keep them running, how to look like you were waiting for your clothes while you dozed in the plastic chairs. "Trick is to actually wash something," he said. "That way you're a customer, not a bum." I put my last clean shirt in a washer with 2 quarters worth of detergent. The machine hummed and sloshed, and the sound was almost comforting. Like normal life happening somewhere nearby at 2 in the morning, the laundromat was half full of people who clearly weren't there to wash clothes. A woman in the corner folded and refolded the same towel over and over. An old man slept sitting up, his chin on his chest. The attendant behind the counter read a magazine and pretended not to notice. Tommy shared coffee from a thermos. It was weak and bitter, but it was warm. "This is the thing about being homeless," he said quietly. "People think it happens all at once. Like you're fine one day and living under a bridge the next. But it's more like drowning. You go under a little bit at a time." A police car cruised by outside, and everyone in the laundromat looked away from the windows. "The thing about being a vet," Tommy continued, "is people thank you for your service, and then they act like that's enough. Like saying, 'Thank you fixes whatever got broken over there.'" My shirt finished washing. I moved it to a dryer and fed more quarters into the machine. "You know about the camps under the bridges?" Tommy asked. "What camps?" He pulled a napkin from his pocket and drew a rough map of downtown Portland. "Burnside Bridge. East side, under the on-ramp. It's not much, but it's something." The napkin showed streets I'd driven on my whole adult life, marked with X's where people like us tried to stay alive. "There's rules," Tommy said, "but they look out for each other. Better than this." He gestured around the laundromat. At 6 in the morning, the attendant started giving us looks. Time to move on. I folded my still damp shirt and followed Tommy outside. The sun was coming up, but it was still cold enough to see your breath. Downtown was waking up. Coffee shops opening, early commuters walking to bus stops. The normal world starting another normal day. Tommy says the bridge camps have rules, but they look out for their OWN. My truck died outside the Safeway on 82nd Avenue with a grinding noise that sounded like expensive trouble. Steam poured from under the hood, and the temperature gauge was buried in the red zone. I coasted into a parking space and turned off the engine. The mechanic at the Chevron station across the street took one look and shook his head. "Alternator's shot. Water pump too, from the look of it. You're talking 400, maybe 5. I had $23 in my wallet. What if I just want to sell it?" He walked around the truck, kicking the tires. As is, maybe $50 for scrap. $50 wouldn't even cover a week at the cheapest motel. I stood there watching other people pump gas and drive away, going to places they belonged that I loaded everything I could carry into a shopping cart from the Safeway lot. Sleeping bag, backpack with clothes, toolbox, the framed photo of Marie and Jessica. Everything that mattered in my life now fit in a grocery cart with a wobbly front wheel. The walk downtown took 2 hours. People looked right through me or stepped out of my way on the sidewalk. A shopping cart full of belongings marks you in ways you don't expect. You stop being a person and become a problem to avoid. The camps under the Burnside Bridge were bigger than Tommy's napkin had shown. Maybe 20 tents clustered around concrete support pillars, with tarps strung between them for extra shelter. It looked like a military base built by people who'd given up on regulations that a man in his 30s with one leg missing below the knee rolled over in a wheelchair. He had dark skin and careful eyes, like someone used to evaluating threats. You knew? Yeah. Tommy Valdez said, Tommy's good people. I'm Rodriguez. He looked at my cart, my military bearing. You serve? I pulled out my DD 214 discharge papers. He read them carefully. Vietnam. 2 tours. He handed the papers back. Welcome home, brother. Rodriguez explained the rules while I set up my tent between his spot and an older woman named Susan who was heating soup on a camp stove. No drugs in camp. No violence. Everyone contributes what they can: food, information, protection. Police come through every few days, he said. Mostly they leave us alone if we keep it clean and don't cause trouble. But you learn to pack fast. Susan brought me a cup of soup without being asked. She had gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. First night's always the hardest, she said. Gets easier once you learn the rhythm. I set up my tent on a piece of cardboard Rodriguez gave me. The concrete was cold and hard, but it was shelter. Sort of as darkness fell, the sounds of the city seemed louder. Traffic overhead, sirens in the distance, voices carrying across the camp. I lay in my sleeping bag listening to other people's quiet conversations and tried not to think about Marie's warm body next to me in our old bed. Rodriguez mentioned the morning routine. Everyone out by 7 a.m. before police sweeps. The alarm on my phone went off at 6:30, but half the camp was already stirring. Rodriguez was folding his tent with practiced movements, everything disappearing into a military surplus backpack in under 5 minutes. First rule, he said, be gone before they have a reason to move us. I stuffed my sleeping bag and tent into my cart and followed the others out from under the bridge. Some people headed toward downtown, others split off toward the river. Like a reverse commute. The central library didn't open until 10, so I walked the streets for 3 hours. My feet hurt in boots that weren't designed for this much walking. I stopped at McDonald's for coffee and used their bathroom to wash my face and hands. That my reflection in the mirror looked rough. 3 days of stubble, hair that needed cutting, eyes that had seen too much. I splashed water on my face and tried to look like someone who belonged somewhere. The library became my office. Free internet, warm building, bathrooms that locked. I applied for jobs online. Knowing my address situation made me unemployable. The applications all wanted phone numbers and references and places to send paperwork. At noon, I walked to St. Francis Parish for lunch. The line was already 40 people deep, mostly men my age or older. Some I recognized from the camps. Others looked like they'd been on the streets longer, thinner, more weathered, talking to themselves or staring at nothing. The volunteers served spaghetti and bread. The woman ladling sauce onto my plate smiled and said, God bless. I wanted to tell her I wasn't sure God was paying attention anymore, but I just said thank you. After lunch, I walked to the VA office on Salmon Street. The waiting room was full of men with the same worn-down look. I took a number, 47. The digital display showed they were serving number 12. First time, asked the guy next to me. For this, yeah. Better bring a book next time. Or a sleeping bag. They called my number at 4:15, 15 minutes before closing. The caseworker was a young woman with tired eyes who'd probably heard every story in the book. Your disability claim is under review, she said, reading from her computer screen. Average processing time is 6 to 8 months. I filed 8 months ago. She clicked through more screens. There's a note here about missing medical records. Did you submit your service medical history? I'd submitted everything 3 times. But somewhere in the bureaucracy, my papers had disappeared. Can you expedite it? I'm homeless. She made a note in my file. I'll flag it as priority, but that doesn't guarantee anything. The system is backed up. I walked out of the VA office as they locked the doors behind me. My phone showed 7 missed calls from Jessica. I'd been avoiding her calls because I didn't know what to say. What do you tell your daughter when you've become everything you raised her not to be? I found a payphone outside the Greyhound station and called her back. Dad, oh my God, where are you? I've been calling. I'm okay, sweetheart. You're not okay. Mom told me about the house. Why didn't you call? In the background, I could hear Marie's voice. Is that him? Tell him, Dad, just come stay with us for a while. We'll figure something out. I wanted to say yes, but I could hear my grandson Tommy in the background asking who was on the phone. 8 years old and still believing his grandpa was someone worth looking up to. Jessica leaves a voicemail at the VA office asking them to find him that I was supposed to be at Tommy's birthday party on Saturday. Jessica's boy turning 8, and I'd promised to be there. I'd even found work for 2 days helping a moving company load trucks. My back screamed the whole time, but I earned $140 cash. Friday night, everything went wrong. Police raids happen without warning. 1 minute you're settling in for the night. The next minute flashlights are cutting through the darkness and voices are shouting orders. Everyone up. Move. Now, I grabbed what I could, sleeping bag, backpack, but my tent and camp stove got left behind in the chaos. People scattered like insects when you turn on the lights. Some ran toward the river, others disappeared into downtown alleys. I found myself crouched behind a dumpster 6 blocks away, listening to sirens fade into the distance. The BY morning. The campsite was empty except for trash and abandoned gear. Yellow police tape marked the area as off-limits. My tent was gone, along with the small camp stove I'd bought at Goodwill and the tarp that had kept me dried out. I spent Saturday morning at Goodwill, replacing what I'd lost. Sleeping bag, $25. Small backpack, $15. Tarp, $18. The $140 I'd earned was down to $82 before noon. That Tommy's party started at 2. I stood outside Jessica's house for 20 minutes, watching through the window as 8-year-olds ran around the living room. Jessica was hanging streamers. Her husband was setting up a folding table for presents. That I looked like what I was, a homeless man who smelled like the streets. My clothes were clean, but wrinkled from being stuffed in a backpack. My hands were dirty from setting up a new campsite that morning. That I couldn't walk into that house and hug my grandson with these hands. Instead, I called Jessica from the payphone at the corner store. Dad, where are you? Tommy keeps asking when Grandpa Frank is coming. I can't make it, sweetheart. Something came up. Silence on the other end. Then, Dad, what's wrong? You sound, tell Tommy I'm sorry. Tell him Grandpa loves him. Dad, wait. I hung up and walked back toward downtown. That evening, my phone rang. Jessica again. He made you a card, she said when I answered. It has a picture of you and him working on that birdhouse last Christmas. I closed my eyes. Last Christmas, when I still had a workshop in my garage and steady hands and the luxury of planning projects with my grandson. Mom's here, Jessica continued. She wants to talk to you. Marie's voice came on the line, sharp and tired. Frank, this is enough. You missed your grandson's birthday. You're living on the street. How much lower are you going to sink? It's temporary, Marie. The disability, stop. Just stop. You chose this. You chose the bottle over the pills. You chose pride over asking for help. You chose everything except your family. The line went quiet except for the sound of traffic. He's your grandson too. I said finally. Yes. And I won't let him watch his grandfather destroy himself. She hung up. His wallet now holds $23 in his grandson's address written on a piece of paper. March brought warmer weather and the strange relief of not worrying about freezing to death. The camp rebuilt itself under the bridge like it always did after raids. People drifted back with new tents and old complaints about police harassment. Rodriguez taught me things they don't cover in survival manuals. How to waterproof cardboard by layering plastic bags between sheets. Which fast food places let you use the bathroom without buying anything. How to make shoes last longer by rotating which foot bears the most weight. Street education, he called it. Stuff you hope you never need to know. I found day labor at a temp agency on McLaughlin. Show up at 5 in the morning, compete with men half my age for 4 hours of work unloading trucks. When I got picked, it paid $32 after taxes. When I didn't, I walked back to camp empty-handed. The work destroyed my back, but I needed the money. Standing in line with 20 other desperate men, hoping the supervisor would point at me instead of the younger guy next to me. Swallowing pride and ibuprofen in equal measure. My hands shook during the heavy lifting. Not from nerves this time, from withdrawal. I'd been rationing my drinking money, stretching a bottle over 3 days instead of one. The math was simple: beer or food, never both. Camp politics started getting complicated. Someone was stealing food from the communal supplies. Accusations flew between the veterans and newer arrivals. People who'd been sharing resources for months suddenly weren't sure who to trust. Susan called a camp meeting after dinner. She had a way of speaking that made people listen, calm, reasonable, like a teacher addressing unruly students. "We're not going to survive if we turn on each other," she said. "Police want us gone. City wants us gone. Property owners want us gone. We're all each other has." The meeting ended with new rules about personal belongings and shared responsibilities. But I could see the cracks forming. Stress makes people do ugly things, and we were all stressed all the time. I found myself volunteering for night watch, sitting up with whoever was having trouble sleeping. Funny how being homeless gives you a different relationship with time. When you have nowhere to be and nothing to do, 3 a.m. conversations become normal. Rodriguez talked about his sister in Salem, how she'd offered him a couch, but he was too proud to call her back. An older man named Billy shared stories about Korea, battles he'd never told anyone about. Everyone carried weight they couldn't put down. During the day, I perfected the art of looking busy while homeless. Libraries, coffee shops, bus stations, anywhere you could sit without being asked to leave. I learned which security guards were sympathetic and which ones enjoyed the power of moving people along. The temp agency supervisor pulled me aside after my 3rd week. "You're reliable," he said. "Most guys your age can't handle the physical work. You keep showing up." I wanted to tell him I kept showing up because I had to. Because $32 was the difference between eating dinner and going hungry. Because purpose, even 4 hours of unloading trucks, was better than no purpose at all. The temp agency supervisor asks if Frank can handle heavier work tomorrow. Dave called on a Tuesday morning while I was drinking coffee at the Starbucks on Burnside. Same number I'd worked under for 15 years, showing up on my cracked phone screen like a message from my old life. "Frank, got a basement job. Week's worth of work, cash under the table. You interested?" I stared at the phone. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately. A week of steady work, real money, maybe enough to get ahead instead of just surviving. But part of me knew this was Dave throwing me a lifeline, and lifelines sometimes drown the people trying to grab them. "What kind of work?" "Finishing touches on that Hawthorne renovation. Trim work, mostly. Light stuff. Light stuff." Code for work that wouldn't break my back or reveal how far I'd fallen. I showed up at the job site early, freshly shaved, and wearing my cleanest clothes. The house looked expensive, the kind of renovation that cost more than I'd made in 2 years of construction work. Dave's van was already there, along with trucks I recognized from better days. Dave met me at the front door with a handshake that felt careful, like he wasn't sure what he was dealing with. "Good to see you, Frank." The other workers nodded when I walked in. Mike and Tony, both guys I'd trained when they were green. Now they looked at me like I was someone they used to know. The basement was nearly finished. Drywall up, electrical installed, just trim work and detail painting left. The kind of work I could do in my sleep, if my hands weren't shaking, but they were shaking. 3 days without a drink, trying to make my money last, and my body was reminding me about all the things I'd been using alcohol to forget. Pain in my back, tremors in my fingers, a general shakiness that made holding a nail gun feel dangerous. Dave noticed first. "You okay?" "Just tired." But Mike and Tony noticed too. During lunch break, I sat by myself eating a gas station sandwich while they talked quietly near Dave's van. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew the tone. They were discussing what to do about Frank. "Heard he lost his house," Mike said, not quite quiet enough. "Marie left him," Tony added. "My wife saw her at Safeway. Said she couldn't take it anymore." They weren't being cruel, just honest in the way working men talk about tragedy that hasn't touched them yet. But hearing your life reduced to gossip makes everything feel smaller. That I finished my sandwich and went back to work. Measured twice, cut once. The old habits came back, but my hands wouldn't stay steady. The trim pieces didn't line up right. Gaps where there should be tight joints. At 3 o'clock, I set down my tools and walked outside. Dave followed me. "Frank, if you need, I can't do this." He nodded like he'd been waiting for me to figure it out. "Take care of yourself first, buddy." I loaded my tools back into the cart and pushed it toward the bus stop. Behind me, I could hear Mike asking Dave what happened. The answer was simple. I'd become someone who couldn't trust his own hands. The walk back to camp took an hour. My phone rang twice. Dave's number, but I didn't answer. Some conversations don't have good endings. Dave calls after him, but Frank keeps walking toward the bus stop. April rain in Portland falls like a personal insult. Not the gentle mist tourists expect, but steady, soaking precipitation that finds every weakness in your shelter and exploits it. The camp's flooded twice in 1 week. The first time, I managed to save my sleeping bag by moving to higher ground near the bridge supports. The second time, I lost everything again: tent, clothes. The small propane stove I'd bought with my last temp agency paycheck. 2 nights in the emergency room followed, pretending to have chest pains while hoping no one would call my bluff. The nurses knew the game. They'd seen it before, homeless people using the ER as a warm, dry place to sleep. But they were kind about it, bringing me heated blankets and checking on me every few hours. "You can't keep doing this," said the social worker on my second visit. She was young, probably fresh out of school, with the kind of earnest concern that hadn't been worn down yet. She handed me a stack of paperwork for housing programs. Wait lists ranging from 6 months to 2 years. Applications that required addresses, phone numbers, references, all the things that disappear when you become homeless. "I'll fill these out anyway," I told her. The VA disability came through with a partial approval, $200 increase, bringing my monthly check to $847. Good news that felt like bad news when I looked at apartment listings starting at $1,200 for studio units in neighborhoods I wouldn't want to walk through at night. That I discovered the economy of food waste. Bakeries threw away day-old bread at closing time. Food trucks dumped unsold items rather than storing them overnight. If you timed it right and weren't too proud to ask, you could eat without spending money. The baker at Kin's Artisan gave me a bag of yesterday's pastries without making it feel like charity. "My grandfather was homeless during the Depression," he said when I thanked him. Small world, big circles. Simple kindness from strangers kept me going more than social services ever did. The librarian who ignored the fact that I was clearly living rough. The coffee shop owner who let me charge my phone. The bus driver who didn't ask for exact change when I was short a quarter. I started recognizing other homeless people in the normal world. You develop an eye for it. The careful way someone counts change, the gratitude for small accommodations, the particular tiredness that comes from never fully resting. We'd nod at each other in grocery stores or waiting for buses. Members of a club nobody wants to join. The housing applications disappeared into bureaucracy. Confirmation letters went to addresses I no longer had. Follow-up appointments were scheduled during times I couldn't predict my location. The system assumed you had the infrastructure of normal life while trying to help you get back to normal life. My phone developed a crack across the screen when I dropped it getting out of a police car. Not arrested, just moved along from a doorway where I'd been trying to sleep. The officer was polite but firm. "Can't stay here, friend." Business owner complained. The crack made reading texts difficult, but it still worked. 7 more missed calls from Jessica. I kept meaning to call her back, but what could I say? That her father was learning to eat from dumpsters? That he timed his day around public bathroom availability? That dignity was something he remembered having but couldn't quite locate anymore. The housing waitlist confirmation letter goes to an address Frank no longer has. Pioneer Courthouse Square on Wednesday evenings became my university. Not official, just a gathering of men who'd all worn uniforms and now wore the uniform of the dispossessed, secondhand clothes. Weathered faces, eyes that had seen too much. Billy Kowalski, 82 years old, hands that shook from something more than age. He'd been at Chosin Reservoir in Korea, fighting Chinese soldiers in temperatures that made Portland rain feel tropical. Never talked to anyone about it until he started sleeping outside. Funny thing about war, he told me over shared coffee from a thermos. You think it ends when you come home, but it follows you around like a dog you can't lose. Marcus Johnson had been in Iraq, came back with PTSD and a drinking problem that cost him his family. He carried wallet photos of kids he hadn't seen in 3 years, 2 boys and a girl who'd stopped asking when daddy was coming home. Family court don't care if you got issues from serving, Marcus said. They just care if you show up sober and pay child support. Hard to do both when you can't hold a job. The Wednesday meetings weren't therapy. Nobody talked about feelings or healing. We shared practical information. Which churches asked too many questions before feeding you? How to stay warm during police sweeps? Where to get haircuts for job interviews from volunteers who didn't judge. That we also shared something harder to name. Recognition, maybe. When Billy's hands shook too hard to light his cigarette, someone always had a lighter ready. When Marcus got that look that meant he was seeing Baghdad instead of Portland, we'd sit with him until it passed that I realized I wasn't alone in this particular type of falling. Veterans have a way of ending up on the streets that's different from other people's homelessness. We're trained to endure discomfort, to follow orders, to not complain when things get bad. Qualities that make good soldiers sometimes make invisible homeless people. The group traded war stories, but also street stories. Which VA caseworkers actually tried to help versus which ones just processed paperwork. How to navigate the maze of services without losing your mind or your place in line. Tommy from the camp sometimes joined us. He'd become more cynical since I'd known him, harder around the edges. Problem with hope, he said during one meeting, is it makes you vulnerable. Better to expect nothing and be surprised when something works out. But Marcus disagreed. You stop hoping, you're already dead. Just breathing and taking up space. I found myself somewhere between their positions. Hope was dangerous, but so was despair. Better to focus on the next meal, the next warm place to sleep, the next small step towards something better. During one meeting, Marcus mentioned a dishwashing job opening at a diner on Burnside. Owner's decent, he said. Doesn't ask too many questions, pays cash daily. But he expects you to show up clean and work hard. I wrote down the address on a piece of cardboard torn from a coffee cup. Mel's Diner, 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. shift. It wasn't much, but it was something. A chance to earn instead of just survive. After the meeting, I walked past the diner. Through the window, I could see the kitchen, bright lights, steam, the controlled chaos of meal service. People working with purpose, making food that made other people happy for the first time in months. I let myself imagine being inside instead of outside. Part of something instead of apart from everything. Marcus mentions a dishwashing job opening at a diner on Burnside. Mel's Diner looked like it. Hadn't been updated since 1975. Red vinyl booths with duct tape patches. Chrome fixtures that had seen better decades. And a grill that had cooked 1,000,000 eggs. The owner, a heavy-set woman named Lisa, looked me up and down when I walked in at 5:30 in the morning. You Marcus's friend? The one looking for dish work. Yes, ma'am. Frank Castellano. She studied my face, probably trying to figure out if I was reliable or just another street person looking for quick cash. I'd washed up in the McDonald's bathroom, shaved with a disposable razor, put on my cleanest shirt, did everything I could to look like someone worth hiring. 6 to 2, 6 days a week. $9 an hour, cash daily. Free meal during your shift. You show up drunk or high, you're gone. You steal anything, you're gone. You understand? Yes, ma'am. When can you start? Right now. The dish pit was a narrow space between the kitchen and the dining room, with industrial sinks, a commercial dishwasher, and steam that made everything feel like a sauna. The breakfast rush started at 7, and by 8 o'clock I was drowning in plates, cups, and silverware. The work was hard. Endless dishes, scalding water. Grease burns on my forearms from reaching into the machine. But it was steady income and purpose. For 8 hours a day, I wasn't homeless Frank. I was the dishwasher, someone the kitchen depended on to keep things moving. Lisa's meal policy was generous. I could order anything on the menu during my shift. First full dinner I'd eaten in weeks. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, pie for dessert. Food that didn't come from a dumpster or a soup kitchen. The servers were mostly young women working their way through community college. They called me Frank and included me in kitchen banter. Small talk about the weather, complaints about difficult customers, jokes about the ancient equipment. Normal workplace conversation that made me feel human. Customers could see me through the pass-through window between kitchen and dining room. Most ignored me, but some stared with curiosity or discomfort. I learned to keep my head down and focus on the work. After 2 weeks, I'd saved $480 cash. More money than I'd had at one time since losing the house. I started thinking about possibilities, maybe a room in a boarding house. Maybe enough stability to look for better work. Then a regular customer complained to Lisa about my appearance. Mrs. Henderson, a retired teacher who came in every Tuesday for coffee and toast, pointed through the window and told Lisa she was concerned about hygiene standards. "He looks homeless," she said, loud enough for the whole diner to hear. "I don't feel comfortable eating here anymore." Lisa defended me initially. "Frank's a good worker. Clean, reliable, respectful." But Mrs. Henderson posted a review on Yelp that night, concerned about sanitary conditions. "Visible homeless person working in kitchen. Management should address this issue." 3 more online reviews appeared over the next few days. Corporate called Lisa on Thursday morning. I could hear the conversation from the dish pit. Corporate was concerned about brand image and customer complaints. Lisa found me during the lunch lull, looking uncomfortable and apologetic. "Frank, I'm sorry. I have to let you go." Corporate's worried about the reviews. She handed me my final paycheck, $480 cash, plus an extra $50 from her own pocket. "You're a good worker," she said. "This isn't fair." I cleaned out my small locker and said goodbye to the servers. 2 weeks of normal life. Over because someone decided I looked too much like what I was. Lisa slips him an extra $50 and the address of another diner looking for help. Summer brought crowds to the camps. People who'd survived winter elsewhere drifted back to Portland, claiming spots under bridges and in doorways. The veteran area near Burnside became overcrowded with men I didn't recognize. Territory disputes started over shade and water access. Arguments about who'd been there first, whose gear could go where, who had rights to which spots. Rodriguez tried to mediate, but even his calm authority was stretched thin. "Summer homeless is different," Susan explained while we waited in line at the soup kitchen. "Winter homeless, you're all just trying to survive. Summer homeless, people start thinking about comfort." Police sweeps increased too. Housed residents complained more when the weather was nice, when homelessness became visible instead of hidden. Property owners called city services about camping and loitering. Politicians made speeches about cleaning up downtown. The sweeps came at different times now, sometimes dawn, sometimes noon, sometimes midnight. No pattern to predict, no routine to plan around. We learned to sleep lightly and pack faster. My health was deteriorating in ways that weren't obvious. Chronic dehydration from not having easy access to clean water. Infected cuts on my hands and feet that wouldn't heal properly. A persistent cough from sleeping on concrete that had developed into something deeper. The VA clinic treated symptoms but couldn't address the root cause. Antibiotics for infections, inhalers for respiratory problems, pain medication for my back. But as long as I was living rough, nothing would fully heal. I discovered prescription costs when the pharmacy told me my antibiotics would be $180 without insurance. The VA covered some medications, but not others. The bureaucracy of healthcare assumed you had an address, a phone, and the ability to follow complex treatment schedules. Patient assistance program. The pharmacist suggested when she saw my face fall. Takes 3 weeks to approve, but it covers most costs. 3 weeks felt like forever when you were fighting an infection. I walked out without the medication and hoped my body would figure it out on its own. The heat made everything worse. Concrete held temperature from the day and radiated it back all night. Finding shade became a survival skill. Libraries and coffee shops could only accommodate so many people for so long before they started asking questions. I learned about cooling centers, churches, and community centers that opened when temperatures hit dangerous levels. But they had rules. No alcohol, no weapons, no pets. For many people, those rules meant choosing between staying cool and keeping the few things that made life bearable. Tommy started carrying a knife after someone tried to steal his backpack while he slept. "Can't trust anybody anymore," he said. "Too many people, not enough space." Even Rodriguez seemed stressed. His usual calm demeanor cracked during a dispute over campsite boundaries. "This isn't working," he told me privately. "Too many people, too much heat, too much attention from police." Camp meetings became more frequent and more tense. Susan did her best to maintain order, but you could see the community fracturing under pressure. People who'd looked out for each other all winter were suddenly competitors for limited resources. I found myself volunteering for longer shifts on camp security, staying awake while others slept. Partly to help, partly because sleep had become difficult anyway. The sounds of the city seemed louder in summer. More traffic, more sirens, more voices carrying across the camps. During quiet moments, I thought about Jessica's offer from months ago. A spare room, a door that locked, a chance to wash the street off my body. But I also knew I'd changed in ways that couldn't be easily reversed. The pharmacist suggests a patient assistance program with a 3-week approval process. The soup kitchen on Morrison Street served lunch from 11 to 1, Monday through Friday. I'd been eating there for months, knew the routine, recognized the faces. So when Jessica walked in at noon on a Thursday in July, I thought I was hallucinating. She looked older than I remembered. Gray threads in her brown hair, worry lines around her eyes that hadn't been there at Christmas. She stood in the doorway scanning faces until she found mine. Dad. The word carried relief and heartbreak in equal measure. She walked over to my table, past the other men eating donated sandwiches and leftover restaurant food. Her clothes marked her as an outsider. Clean jeans, a blouse that still held its shape, shoes without holes that I stood up, suddenly aware of how I must look. 6 months on the streets had changed my body. Thinner, more weathered. Older in ways that weren't just about time passing. Jessica. She hugged me before I could protest, and I felt her body shake with suppressed tears. I smelled her shampoo, her laundry detergent, the scent of a normal life I'd almost forgotten existed. I've been looking for you for months, she said when she pulled back. Shelters, camps, hospitals. Finally, someone at the VA office told me you might be here. We walked to Tom McCall Waterfront Park and sat on a bench facing the river. The park was full of normal people doing normal things. Joggers, dog walkers, families with strollers. Life continuing for people who had places to go home to. Tommy asks about you, Jessica said. He made you a birthday card. It's been sitting on my kitchen counter for 3 months. I tried to imagine my grandson's small hands drawing pictures for a grandfather who'd disappeared from his life. The thought felt like a physical weight in my chest. I'm sorry I missed his party. Dad, I don't care about parties. I care about you. Look at yourself. I looked down at my clothes, clean but worn, held together with safety pins and determination. My hands were permanently stained from dishwater and weather. My fingernails were short and dirty no matter how often I washed them. This isn't temporary anymore, she continued. You've been on the streets for 6 months. When are you going to ask for help? I'm on waiting lists. I have a spare room, a bed, a shower. Why won't you just come home with me? The question hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I could cross. I wanted to say yes, but I also knew I'd been carrying the street with me for months now. The hypervigilance, the distrust, the constant calculation of resources and threats. You don't shake that off just because someone offers you a key. I don't want to bring this into your life, I said finally. This is already in my life, Dad. You're my father. Your problems are my problems whether you're sleeping in my spare room or under a bridge. A jogger ran past us, earbuds in, focused on her workout. Normal people with normal problems, deadlines, mortgage payments, relationship drama. Problems that seemed manageable compared to not knowing where you'd sleep tonight. I need time to think about it, I said. Jessica pulled a piece of paper from her purse and wrote her address and phone number in careful handwriting. I'll be here Sunday at 2 o'clock. Same bench. If you want help, come find me. If not, I'll keep looking for you until you do. She kissed my forehead and walked away, leaving me holding the paper with her information and $100 and $20 bills. Frank promises to call her in 3 days, after he thinks about her offer. I walked Jessica's neighborhood for an hour before I got the courage to approach her house. Quiet residential street in southeast Portland, modest craftsman houses with gardens and porches. The kind of neighborhood where people knew their neighbors and left their doors unlocked. Her house was painted yellow with white trim, a small front yard with flower beds that someone actually took care of. A child's bicycle with training wheels sat on the front porch. Tommy's bike, probably. Normal suburban life, continuing like it always had. I walked past the house twice before stopping at the corner. Through the front window, I could see a living room with comfortable furniture, bookshelves, family photos on the mantel. A life that had room for one more person, if that person wasn't too damaged to fit. What would I bring into that house? The hypervigilance that made me wake up at every sound? The need to know where all the exits were? The way I hoarded food now, eating everything put in front of me because you never knew when the next meal would come? I'd spent 6 months learning to live with nothing, and now I wasn't sure I remembered how to live with something. At camp that evening, I talked to Rodriguez about Jessica's offer. He was sitting by the river, cleaning his prosthetic leg with a rag and bottle of rubbing alcohol. Family's everything, he said without looking up from his work. I got a sister in Salem who's been calling me for 2 years. Keep telling her I'm not ready. But ready for what? To stop being proud? To admit I need help? What if I screw it up? What if I can't handle being inside again? Rodriguez laughed, but not in a mean way. Brother, you've been handling sleeping on concrete for 6 months. You think a soft bed is going to break you? Susan agreed when I asked her opinion during dinner. Pride is expensive when you're sleeping on concrete, she said. And you got a grandbaby who needs to see that people can get back up after they fall down. But Tommy Valdez had a different perspective. Families abandon you when things get hard, he said, drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago. They make promises they can't keep. Better to expect nothing and not get disappointed. His cynicism felt familiar, like armor I'd been wearing without realizing it. Easier to expect rejection than to hope for acceptance. Safer to stay where you were than to risk failing somewhere new. But I also remembered the sound of Jessica's voice when she'd found me at the soup kitchen. Relief and love and determination. The way she'd hugged me despite how I looked and smelled. The way she'd said, "You're my father," like that meant something permanent. I found a payphone outside the 7-Eleven on Division and dialed her number. My hands were shaking, but not from withdrawal this time. Dad, oh my God, I was hoping you'd call. The offer still good? The spare room? Yes. Of course yes. We talked for 20 minutes about logistics and ground rules. No drinking in the house. I'd contribute to groceries when I could. We'd take it one day at a time and see how it worked out. Saturday, I said. I can be ready Saturday. I'll pick you up wherever you want. The bridge. Under Burnside, East Side. Noon. After I hung up, I walked back to camp feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Not quite hope. That was too dangerous, but possibility. The chance that falling down didn't have to be permanent. Frank returns to camp to share the news and begin preparing for transition. Why last week at the camp felt like preparing for deployment. Except this time, I was leaving the war instead of heading toward it. I started giving away gear I'd accumulated over months. Extra blanket to a guy who'd just arrived from California. Camp stove to Rodriguez. Tarps to the communal supply. You sure about this? Tommy asked, watching me sort through my belongings. Houses come with rules. Families come with expectations. Streets might be hard, but they're honest. I wasn't sure about anything. But 6 months of concrete had taught me that certainty was a luxury I couldn't afford. Sometimes you had to move towards something better even when you weren't sure it was real. Rodriguez got news Wednesday night that changed everything. A housing program in Salem had an opening, transitional housing for disabled veterans, with support services and job training. He'd been on the waiting list for 18 months. They want me there Monday, he said, reading the letter for the third time. Furnished apartment, caseworker, the whole setup. 2 success stories in 1 week felt like too much good luck for our little corner of the world. But Rodriguez deserved this chance more than anyone. He'd kept the camp together through raids and disputes, helped newcomers learn survival skills, shared resources when he could have hoarded them. Salem's only an hour away, I told him. We'll stay in touch. Damn right we will. You get yourself stable, you come visit. I'll cook you dinner in my own kitchen. Susan gave me advice about reconnecting with family after trauma. She'd been a teacher before her husband died and medical bills destroyed her savings. She understood complicated family dynamics better than most. Patience, she said while we shared coffee Thursday morning. With yourself and with Jessica. You've both changed since this started. Give yourselves time to figure out how to be father and daughter again. What if I can't do it? What if I'm too damaged? Honey, we're all damaged. Question is whether you're going to let that damage define you or just be part of your story. Thursday night, I had my last conversation with Tommy Valdez. He was staying at the camp, suspicious of systems and programs that promised help. Too many failures had made him cautious about hope. You're making a mistake, he said, but without real conviction. But I hope you prove me wrong. We shook hands in the awkward way men do when they're not sure if they'll see each other again. Tommy had taught me which doorways stayed dry and how to make shoes last longer. Street knowledge I hoped I wouldn't need anymore. Friday morning, I packed everything essential into my backpack. Photos of Marie and Jessica, my DD, 214 discharge papers, tools I'd managed to keep sobriety chips from failed attempts at AA. Everything that mattered in my life fit into 30 pounds of belongings. I spent my last afternoon walking downtown Portland, seeing it from the perspective of someone who wouldn't be sleeping rough anymore. The doorways I'd slept in, the bus stops where I'd waited out rain, the coffee shops that had let me charge my phone. A geography of survival I was leaving behind. That evening, camp felt different. People wished me luck, but there was also distance. I was crossing over to the other side, becoming one of the housed people again. The separation wasn't hostile, just real. That I lay in my sleeping bag Friday night listening to the sounds of the city, traffic on the bridge overhead, voices from other camps, sirens in the distance. Sounds that had become the soundtrack to my life for 6 months. Tomorrow, I'd sleep in a bed with sheets and pillows. I'd wake up in a room with a door that locked from the inside. I'd have an address again, a place to receive mail, a phone number people could reach me at. The possibility felt as terrifying as it did promising. Friday night. Frank's last sleep on cardboard under the bridge. Jessica arrived at noon in her red pickup truck, right on time like she'd promised. I was waiting by the camp with my backpack and a garbage bag full of the few things that wouldn't fit. Everything I owned in the world, ready to move in 15 minutes. She got out of the truck and looked around the camp with curious eyes. Not judgmental. She'd clearly done research, knew this wasn't about weakness or moral failure. Just trying to understand the world her father had been living in. Dad, these are your friends. Rodriguez was sitting outside his tent, organizing his own belongings for the move to Salem. Susan was hanging wet clothes on a makeshift line between concrete pillars. Normal people doing normal things in an abnormal place. Rodriguez, Susan, this is my daughter Jessica. Rodriguez stood up and shook her hand with formal politeness. Your father's good people. He helped keep this place together when things got rough. Susan smiled and said, you raised him right. He never forgot his manners, even when everything else was falling apart. Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but she kept her composure. Thank you for looking out for him. We loaded my stuff into the truck bed. Not much to show for 6 months of living, but it represented survival. Adaptation. The ability to keep going when everything familiar disappeared. Our first stop was the bank on Sandy Boulevard. Jessica helped me open a savings account, co-signing because I didn't have an address or steady income. The paperwork felt overwhelming. Forms that assumed normal life circumstances, questions about employment and financial history. My hands shook signing documents. Not from withdrawal this time, but from the strangeness of planning for a future beyond the next meal or safe place to sleep. Second stop was Safeway. Jessica pushing a cart while I tried to remember how to shop for more than immediate hunger. Planning meals required thinking ahead, assuming you'd have a kitchen to cook in and a refrigerator to store leftovers. What do you like to eat? Jessica asked, and I realized I'd forgotten. 6 months of eating whatever was available had erased preferences and desires. Soup kitchen food, dumpster finds, gas station sandwiches, nutrition without choice. I don't remember. I admitted that we bought basics: bread, eggs, milk, coffee, ingredients for simple meals I could prepare without feeling overwhelmed. Normal groceries for someone trying to remember how to be normal. Third stop was Goodwill. Clean clothes to replace the street-worn items I'd been cycling through for months. Jeans that fit properly, shirts without stains or holes, socks that weren't held together with safety pins. Jessica paid for everything without making it feel like charity. Just a daughter helping her father get back on his feet. But I kept track of the amounts. $89 for clothes, $117 for groceries, $25 for the bank account. Debts I wanted to repay when I could. Her house felt enormous after months of sleeping rough. High ceilings, multiple rooms, space to move around without bumping into other people's belongings. The spare room was simple: twin bed, small dresser, window overlooking her garden. Clean and quiet and private. Towels are in the hall closet, Jessica said. Bathrooms, all yours. Take as long as you need. The shower was the first real one I'd had since leaving my own house. Hot water that didn't run out. Soap that wasn't industrial. Privacy to wash without worrying about time limits or other people waiting. I stood under the spray until my fingers pruned, watching months of street grime swirl down the drain. The mirror showed someone I barely recognized. Thinner face, grayer hair, eyes that had seen too much. But clean. Human again, in the most basic sense. Jessica knocks on his door. asks if he's ready for dinner. 3 months later, I had routines that didn't involve survival calculations. Wake up at 6, coffee in Jessica's kitchen while reading news on her laptop, shower and shave before looking for work. Normal morning activities that took practice to remember. The hardware store on Division hired me part-time after the manager discovered I knew the difference between a Phillips head and a flathead screwdriver. 20 hours a week helping customers find supplies for home projects. Drawing on 30 years of construction knowledge that hadn't completely disappeared. "You know your stuff," said Mike, the store manager, after I helped the customer plan a deck renovation. "Most people we hired don't understand load-bearing calculations." The work felt good, helping people build and fix things instead of just trying to survive another day. Customers asked questions I could answer, problems I could solve. Purpose beyond making it to the next meal. MYVA benefits started flowing to Jessica's address. $847 a month that now went toward rent contribution and savings instead of just keeping me alive. Small amounts, but accumulating. Building something instead of losing everything. I attended AA meetings at Jessica's suggestion, mostly to deal with the underlying problems that had made homelessness worse. The meetings were in church basements with folding chairs and bad coffee, full of people trying to reconstruct lives that alcohol had helped destroy. 60 days, I told the group when they asked for updates. It felt like a miracle and a small accomplishment at the same time. Rodriguez called every Sunday from Salem. His housing program was working, stable apartment, job training, healthcare that didn't require emergency room visits. We compared notes about the strange experience of having keys again, sleeping in beds with pillows, planning beyond immediate survival. "Funny thing," he said during one call. "I keep waking up at 5 in the morning, ready to pack my stuff and move on. Takes me a minute to remember I live here now." I knew exactly what he meant. 6 months of hypervigilance doesn't disappear overnight. I still checked locks twice before bed, kept important papers in a bag by the door, hoarded non-perishable food in my dresser drawer. Habits that had kept me alive on the streets but weren't necessary anymore. The transition wasn't seamless. Nightmares persisted, dreams about losing the house again, being trapped in VA bureaucracy, watching Marie die while I filled out forms. Anxiety about stability disappearing as quickly as it had returned. The knowledge that I was one crisis away from being back under the bridge, but small victories accumulated like deposits in my savings account. Tommy's first visit since I'd moved in, my grandson shy but curious about Grandpa Frank's new room. Conversations with Marie on the phone, careful and limited but real. The possibility of rebuilding trust that seemed impossible 6 months ago. Jessica and I developed our own rhythm. Shared dinners when our schedules aligned, quiet mornings when they didn't. Respect for each other's space and routines. The gradual reconstruction of a father-daughter relationship that homelessness had nearly destroyed. "You look different," she told me one evening while we watched the news together. "Calmer, like you're not waiting for the next bad thing to happen." Maybe she was right. Maybe safety was something you could learn to feel again, even after you'd forgotten what it meant. The hardware store offered me full-time hours for the fall season. 40 hours a week, employee benefits, the possibility of advancement. Normal job considerations for someone whose life had become normal enough to consider the future. I said yes immediately. The tomato seeds are planted. And summer is coming. 6 months after moving in with Jessica. I stood in her back garden teaching Tommy how to plant tomato seeds. 8 years old and full of questions about why some seeds grew and others didn't. Why plants needed both sun and water. Why Grandpa Frank knew so much about making things grow. "My dad taught me when I was about your age," I told him, showing him how to make holes the right depth for seeds. His dad taught him before that. It's something fathers pass down to their sons and grandsons. Tommy's small hands were careful with the seeds, placing each one exactly where I showed him. He had Jessica's eyes and her serious concentration when learning something new. But he also had something I remembered from my own childhood, the patience to watch things grow slowly. Will they really turn into tomatoes, Grandpa Frank? If we take care of them, water them when they need it, give them enough sun, protect them from bugs and weather. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. Seeds need both darkness and light to grow. Time underground before breaking through soil. Patience during the slow parts. Protection during the vulnerable stages. I'd found full-time work at the hardware store, 40 hours a week helping customers solve problems I understood. The manager talked about promoting me to assistant supervisor, a title that came with healthcare benefits and 2 weeks paid vacation. Normal job progression for someone whose life had become normal enough to plan ahead. An M.Y. savings account now held $1,847, more money than I'd had since losing the house. Not enough for my own apartment yet, but building toward independence. The difference between surviving and living measured in dollars that accumulated instead of disappearing to AA meetings had become routine, not crisis management. 90 days sober, then 6 months, now approaching a year. The chips in my pocket marked time differently than they had during previous attempts. This time felt less like white-knuckling through withdrawal and more like choosing a different way to be in the world. Marie and I talked every few weeks. Careful conversations that avoided blame and focused on Tommy's school activities or Jessica's job at the dental office. We weren't rebuilding our marriage. Too much damage, too much time apart. But we were rebuilding something. Friendship, maybe. The ability to be in the same room for family gatherings without everything feeling broken. Rodriguez visited from Salem for my birthday in April. Driving down in a used Honda he'd bought with money from his job training program. We sat on Jessica's porch drinking coffee and comparing notes about the strange experience of having addresses again. "You look good," he said. "Like you remember who you were before everything fell apart." Maybe that was true. Or maybe I'd become someone new. Someone who understood that security was fragile but still worth pursuing. Someone who'd learned the difference between surviving and living and chose living when it was available. The nightmares came less frequently now. Still there, probably always would be, but manageable. Dreams about losing everything were balanced by dreams about building something. The hypervigilance had softened into awareness. Caution that kept me safe without keeping me paralyzed. Tommy finished planting his row of seeds and looked up at me with dirt on his hands and satisfaction on his face. "When will we know if they're growing?" Grandpa Frank. Few weeks for the first shoots. Few months for tomatoes. But the important part happens underground first, where we can't see it. I helped him water the newly planted seeds, watching the soil darken as it absorbed moisture. Above us, Jessica called from the kitchen window that dinner was ready. Normal family life resuming around normal activities. Gardening, shared meals. A grandson learning patience from his grandfather. The seeds would grow or they wouldn't. We'd done what we could to give them the best chance. The rest was time and tending and the faith that broken things could sometimes become whole again. Given enough care and the right conditions, summer was coming and the garden was ready.